Forecasting plays a pivotal role in strategic decision making. Accurate sales forecasting can be the key to unlocking growth, optimizing resources, and ensuring your business thrives in an ever-evolving marketplace. And that's precisely what we're here to explore today, the best practices for improving your sales forecasting, all from the lens of revenue operations. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Revenue Lounge podcast. I am your host, Randy Likas, and joining me today is Navin Persaud. Navin is the Vice President of Revenue Operations at 1Password. He has over 20 years experience in sales and marketing operations. He's an expert in leveraging data, technology, and best practices to optimize revenue performance and growth. Hi, Navin. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Randy. Thanks for having me.
So let's start a little bit talking about, a little bit about your role at 1Password. What have you been up to, and kind of what's the scope of the things that you work on?
Sure. I think I like to think I manage a team that nimbly supports almost a 300-person go-to-market org. We manage specifically three areas: the systems that support the go-to-market org, the process that defines like how our functions work and how we then can extrapolate that into reporting, and then sort of the analytics of like what's actually happening. So the simplest analogy is if you think of this in sports. I love sports. I love football and hockey, etc. We build the field of play, we referee what happens, and we provide commentary on the play-by-play.
So I like that. I'm a sports fan as well, and I like that analogy. Talk to me a little bit about, I looked at your background, and going back to your IBM and Lenovo days. Like, you've got a really interesting background. You've got some pre-sales and some channel and some project management. How did you get into RevOps? Like, what's your story?
I think it was an aversion to being a seller. Sales is hard, but it was a useful background for me because it allows me to have empathy for what the sales process is and how hard that struggle is when building out tools and processes and trying to referee like what's right and balancing that with what's good for the company. I think a lot of RevOps leaders who don't have a sales background sort of make decisions in a vacuum for the good or bad and not take into the account that selling is hard. It's not easy. It's harder now more than ever. Buyers are smarter, budgets are tighter, and you need to weaponize as much of the data that you have in front of you to arm your sellers with the information they need at the right time at the right moment to be able to capitalize on what it is they're doing.
So when you look to build out your team, is there any certain skill sets that you look for in particular, like really solid operations experience or really solid program management experience? Like, what are the typical skill sets that you look for as you build out your team for somebody in RevOps? Yeah,
outside of like the fundamental things that we need to support the tooling that we have, right? Either the analytics or the CRM, etc. Curiosity for me is a superpower. I need people to understand and want to understand why is it the way it is, not just accept it at its face and move on. For me, curiosity is one of my superpowers. When I join an organization, first place I'm going to go is our business development team. It's the tip of our spear in any company. So I want to understand what it is they do and how they do it and how I can make it easier. And then I'll work my way through the sales journey.
So I'm curious as well by nature, and I'm curious kind of like what's going on with this market these days, right? So there's got several different factors going on. Things that have worked in the past, we're challenged with working today. We'd love to just get your perception on sort of market conditions right now and how that's impacting forecasting.
Yeah, I would look at it from myself as a buyer of software and the things that I'm going through, and then I can sort of flip that around and think, oh, this is what our customers are probably thinking. Am I using the tooling that I have? Is it well adopted? Am I gaining value from it? Should I renew it? Is it easily integratable? Can I live without it? Like, I ask myself those questions every time I come up for renewal on something, 90 days in advance. And our customers are no different, right? Is what we offer in the market like table stakes? Is it a must-have or a nice-to-have? If you're working for a company that sells nice-to-have stuff, you're going to struggle right now. But if you're working for a company that's using 1Password and it's must-to-have, security doesn't go away, bad actors don't go away. Yep. You're rooted in their infrastructure, and I think that's what you really need to press upon.
When you think about like the challenges that of really delivering a predictable or accurate forecast, right? Because those are two different things. One is we can predict what we're going to do, but how accurate are we in terms of doing that? What do you see some of the biggest challenges organizations face right now with making sure that they're both predicting and both accurate as well?
I think every company aspires to run a clean forecast, and some RevOps leaders trying to do it really quickly. When I got here, I knew a few things needed to happen before I could trust a forecast. I needed agreed upon process, a sales process. I needed metrics that were reliable. I needed the system to ensure that only certain people could change certain things at certain times. I needed CPQ in place so that I had an opportunity to understand renewals versus new sales. Like, you needed that foundational data points in place and operational before I could then go on a forecasting journey, so that I could trust the data, so that I know if this happens, I expect to see this. And then I needed the buy-in, right? I needed sales leaders to actually understand that this is how we're going to run the ship, and this is your part in making that ship go, and this is how we're all going to come together to measure the business. If you don't have those ingredients, you don't have the thing you're trying to bake.
So I love that, and I think you're spot on with the processes and the metrics and the buy-in and the adherence. But like, it's not easy to get there, right? So can you talk a little bit about like how do you align those stakeholders around those sort of critical areas that are needed for forecasting?
Sometimes it's a democracy. Sometimes I need everyone to vote and to weigh in. Sometimes it's a little bit of, this is the way we're going, this is the way, right? And You've got to find that right mix. And again, I'll go back to being empathetic of what a sales process works and looks like. You've got to guide sometimes, and you've got to ask for input along the way. If you're struggling in an ops position because you can't get alignment, it's because you really don't have that, I don't know, what's the best way to say this, street cred with respect to your sales process and how that mission unfolds to really make it happen. And I think I work from the bottom up, right? From the sales individuals to the sales leaders. And I've had an opportunity throughout my career to like earn that street cred so that I can come in and say, this is what good looks like, this is what bad looks like, and here's where we're headed.
Yep. Very good. Let's talk about data for a second, because we didn't really dig into data. Where do you make reliable data as part of this forecasting process today?
Super important. Data is an input from our sales teams, from our systems, from our functions that live throughout the sales process, starting inbound, working its way through outbound, etc. But at a certain point, you need custodians or stewards of that data to ensure that it's going to look and evolve in the way that you would expect, so that it can be reliable and reported on, so that it can be ingested by systems downstream, so that it can empower and inform the business. So there are data stewards. I chafe a little bit of data ownership because I think it's a bit shared across a number of functions. But you should definitely have data stewards, people whose jobs are to ensure the systems are doing what you expect, that you have process that makes sure the data evolves in the way you would expect, and then that output becomes valuable. But unless those precursors are in place, that output is a dog's breakfast.
Where do those data stewards typically live? Do they live within the line of business, so marketing, sales, success, or do they live within your organization? And maybe it's not in either or. Maybe they live in both places. But typically, where would you say those stewards have the most success?
They live in the line of business for our teams, and where I've seen the success. Marketing owns a set of data. That's marketing's thing. But where we intersect, that's a shared responsibility.
Okay.
I own the data within the go-to-market, but the minute it goes to finance, that's a shared responsibility between us and finance. And then if our data is ingested in downstream analytics, that's a shared responsibility. We have to work together. We neither one of us owns it in totality, but we own it together to ensure that it's steady, it's reliable, and it's integrated and working.
Now, I'm sure we've all been in situations where we come to our joint meetings, our forecasting meetings, and our data doesn't necessarily look the same, right? And that's ultimately, I think, what you're trying to do is make sure that doesn't happen. But there's instances where it does. what is the source of disconnected data typically that you've seen?
Misalignment of process would be definitely number one. I've had the opportunity, luxury, or the pain to lead forecast calls in my last 3 or 4 places. So I have it's pretty regimented. I'll outline how it works. I'll run a call on Monday and I'll walk through the data, and we're all aligned to that, or we get aligned to that. So that part is not difficult for me once I have the core infrastructure in place. What's difficult is getting the ICs to roll up the data to the managers so they can come well prepared to talk about their business. I think that's where the biggest challenges have always lived.
Yep. So, I've come from an organization where we would talk to a lot of leaders around how they forecast, right? And it's amazing to me how many leaders are still using spreadsheets to roll up their numbers. There's been a lot of changes in technology and RevOps. So, what technology or tools have you seen are best to assist sort of optimizing that process from the IC level on up? And not necessarily, we're not necessarily looking at naming vendors per se, but like how much are you seeing, AI as being, important at this? How much is it all still, regardless of the tool, it's about making sure our processes are correct. We'd love to hear just your take on like technology in general without necessarily naming vendors.
Yeah, I think your core CRM has to do most of it, right? You have to have good process in place to ensure that you have the right stage progression, you have the right activity capture, you have the right definitions of how you roll up a forecast. I think AI is definitely new on the scene and adds a layer of contextualization to what's happening in your pipeline that probably couldn't see in the past. And that is really cool. Further, it's giving the opportunity for real-time notification on what's happening. So, companies who use Slack or any other instant messaging means have the opportunity to sort of manage their pipeline data in different places, whether it be on their mobile device, on the app, etc. So that's offering a bit more. For me, it's giving me context on what I'm seeing in pipeline swings and changes and deal progressions, etc., that break away my reliance from what I need from the reps and allow me to automate in places that I was hoping the reps would capture. Why are we winning deals? Why are we losing deals? Where are deals at? I don't need to bug people anymore. I can now see that real time and understand it and build automation around it to better understand it. All I need is for the reps to be doing what I would expect them to do. And now I have systems of record that can capture more of this.
What would you say is the challenges around data cleanliness, right? So I've been in sales for 30 years, and every organization I've worked with has always wrestled with a certain degree of like the CRM data is actually dirty itself. Like, so we do the best that we can with the data that we have. But how do you look at like making sure that the accurate data, the data that we are looking at is clean?
Activity capture is always a problem everywhere that I've been. How it's defined. There's so many feeder systems going into your CRM, whether it be your sales engagement platform, whether you use a call recording, etc. Like that's always a little noisy. So spending time and focus there for sure. Other areas are just misinterpretation, right? Like you have a large sales team that have come from other sales orgs. They have a certain way of doing things, and you need to align it because every company that I've been in, the sales process has been slightly nuanced, and you need to ensure that you have a sales methodology that everyone's bought into, or at the bare minimum understands that when I do this, it's going to roll up here and it's going to mean this. I think those have been the biggest disconnects that I've seen.
How do you feel RevOps facilitates the analysis of historical sales data to identify trends and patterns, and that can enhance future forecasting?
I think here we really press on our FP&A teams. I think it's my job to ensure that we have a strong data set for which our FP&A teams can actually plan and do some analysis and actually build a model for the future. I don't necessarily think we can give you like what's happened in the last year standpoint from a RevOps view, why we're winning or why we're losing, but a strong FP&A team who can leverage a data set to understand here's what's been the change, here's what's been the average, here's what your rolling 12 looks like. I think that's where we can empower that data, being the custodians of it, to actually fuel a model that makes sense for our business and allow us to plan well in advance.
Fantastic. What about what role does like change management take place in this, right? Because there's, as you mentioned earlier, like everybody's kind of coming from a different organization or a different place of doing things, and you're trying to standardize on a common process across your stakeholders on doing things. So there's a degree of change that needs to happen in order to get everyone aligned. How do you do that effectively in RevOps?
You've got to have a set of priorities that start with your OKRs, and then your priorities sort of ladder up to that. You have to have a willingness to say no, because there are always a lot of requests, some ad hoc, some important, some not. But there's only so much you can do, and you need to be able to prioritize against that. I think very strong RevOps teams operate no different than like developers or dev teams, right? You find a methodology, whether it be agile, you release in sprints. You enable to change, you make it available, you make it aware, you test, and then you deploy and you monitor. I think these are all fundamental things that any RevOps teams that are changing systems or process need to implement to be able to, play nice with the sales org at large.
Yeah. Right now, and sort of the environment that we're in, we see a lot of organizations who say, look, pipeline is always new pipeline is always going to be important. We always have to have that, but it's really difficult to get right now. So we've got to just make sure that we're really solid with the deals that we have, and the winnable deals that we have. And part of that is making sure that we retain our customers as well, right? So what's I guess the question is what role is your success team playing in helping drive accurate forecasting?
Well, renewals are huge, right? It's a lot harder to when you lose a customer, it's a lot harder. So you want to make sure your customers are happy, you're tracking the right metrics, your solution is adopted, it's deployed, you understand support tickets, etc. So you need some tooling around that, and then you need a process by which your CS team can follow and know that like once you have a customer, they're the boots on the ground per se. And they're the ones who are going to be in front of the customers to understand where there's opportunity for growth or where we have to mitigate for contraction or potential churn. And they're the lifeblood of your business from that perspective. Too often, a lot of companies focus too much on the front door and allow it leaky bucket symptoms on the back end. Yeah. And really strong companies understand that once you have customers, growing them and sustaining them is the lifeblood of your business.
I 100% agree. I mean, we can't in this environment. We can't afford to lose customers, right? And so you started to talk about this a little bit, but can you share some best practices around, where companies have significantly improved their forecasting process by adopting sort of a data-first approach? Not necessarily at 1Password, but I'm sure you've talked to some colleagues as well. But like, what are some best practices other organizations have around this area?
Your forecasting process needs to be consolidated across your new business and your expansion business channels. You need to have very clear guidelines as to like who should own opportunities, especially the ones with growth, what your contraction or churn visibility is, and what your renewal outlook is, so that you're just managing that. I think too often it's just sort of relegated, and you're trying to figure out like how many customers do we have renewing this month and how many are overdue. Like, to me, that was a big challenge in a number of places. And one of the first places I go to, like, okay, who are our customers and when are they coming up to understand renewal and what growth can we potentially attach? I think that's sort of left by the wayside, and as a result, you have this long tail of renewals that you're constantly chasing, and you're deploying human CS effort to figure that out, when in reality, the more of that you can automate, the more you can pull that CS team upstream to potentially work on customers who have yet to renew, but you need them deployed and onboarded and healthy.
How early should one start looking at renewal as part of the forecasting process?
I'm going to say the minute a customer is assigned, you need to understand what your onboarding rhythm is and whether you're getting customers deployed to a certain point so that you can actually hand them off to CS. Once they're in CS land, you should start thinking about them at the 6-month mark, because think about how long it'll take to change the ship in the ocean and turn it around if you're not going in the right direction. that gives you enough time to then have the right level of cadence and interaction with the right people to ensure that if you're not well adopted, you have time to sort of mitigate that. So when it comes time for renewal, you're more likely to have growth conversations than you are to have how do I save you conversations.
Yep. Well, listen, David, I appreciate the insights specifically to revenue operations that you've shared today. We're going to transition a little bit on the call now, and we're going to have the format be a little bit more rapid fire in terms of questions. So, first question I have for you is what's one book that you've read in the recent past that you've loved and you might want to share with the audience?
I can do one better. Just bring it right here. So this is great. I think this book really tells me that you only have so many of these things to give out in your life. So you need to be very, very careful with where you do it. Because if you don't, I think you'll just be stressed out to no end. Like, really think, like, is this, do I really, really need to do that? And I really need to care about that? I really need to go to bed sleeping and thinking about that? Or is that something I need to let it wash over me and then move on to the next thing?
Yeah, that actually made me think of something, which is in RevOps, you're probably asked to do so many different things. How do you say no to all the requests that you get from different lines of business, or where do you say no? Where do you draw that line?
There's a power, I think, in the ability and the confidence to be able to say no. I think you have to think of it from a trade-off standpoint. You have to look at the business, look at your priorities, look at the things you're working on already, and ask the business, okay, so if I do this, what on this list would you not want me to do? Because I can't do them all. And which ones are the most important? Because my goal is to ensure we're creating pipeline and we're closing business and we're renewing customers. It is my goal. And I do that through the systems and through the data and through the process, through all the refereeing I do. And does the thing you're asking me solve for those? And if it doesn't, we need to be asking ourselves, why are we doing it?
What's your favorite part about working in RevOps?
Every day is brutally different. And I say brutally because it absolutely is. I think the monotony of a job can weigh on you, and I don't have that. Every day there's a new initiative, there's a new project, there's something broken, there's something working, and at the end of that there's a thank you. And to me, that's exactly what I love about being in this job is, you know, it's the thank you. This is a thank you from the sellers or from the field or from the teams around, we did this thing and allowed me to do this thing and I got rewarded for this thing.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
Probably no other position that you have as much influence across several different business lines, right? Marketing has their, in the old world, marketing used to have their metrics, sales used to have their metrics. Your job is to make sure all of our metrics are aligned and we're working towards the same thing where you can have the most impact. What reverse side of that question? What's your least favorite part about working in RevOps? I guess another way to say it is like, what's really hard about your job?
The saying no. I really want to be able to do everything, and especially the things that do make sense, especially the things that move us forward. The reality is there's bandwidth, right? There's only so many things you can solve for. So I don't like saying no, but it's a necessity rather than like a thing I enjoy.
Yeah. Any advice that you've received from someone that has kind of stayed with you that you'd like to share with us?
Oh yeah, I love it because I heard it long ago. Then I heard it in a John Wick movie, and then it's just resonated with me ever since. It's how you do anything is how you do everything. Mm-hmm. So I use that in how I interview people. I use that in how we release, features and functionality. It's the little details, and I am extremely to my peers and to everyone else detail oriented. I see a lot of things. I'm called the Eye of Sauron sometimes. Sometimes it's a distraction, and I get it, but I wouldn't be in the position I am if I didn't have eyes on a lot of areas of the business. And it's really telling because, how you work with customers and how you do anything else, right? Those things are going to bleed through. You're going to fall back to how you operate. So to me, however you release code or how you announce a new project or how you work with your peers or how you treat people, how you do anything is how you absolutely will do everything.
I love that. All right, last one for you. What's the one piece of advice for people that would like to have your job someday? Right, RevOps is one of the fastest growing functions. I think LinkedIn has RevOps has the most jobs across LinkedIn right now. For someone that wants to be a VP of Revenue Operations, what advice might you give them?
You got to be in the trenches before you can be in the top, right? And I earned my stripes. I absolutely made sure that when I got my first RevOps gig or sales ops gig, sit me in with the SDRs. I want to be in the middle of this thing. I want to learn from that point and move forward. You cannot do this job in isolation. You cannot be successful in isolation. You need to be curious. You need to understand the sales process, and then you can then take that back and mitigate how technical code works and how flows operate, and whether sales teams are actually going to do this thing that you've miraculously built, or whether they're going to go revert to a spreadsheet because it's way too complicated. So lead with empathy, absolutely. Be curious, and get really close with your sales teams.
Yep. Well, that's great. I appreciate all the insight. I really enjoyed talking with you today. Let's share a beer sometime when we're in the same city.
Sounds good. Thanks, Randy.
All right, thanks so much.